I'm so excited to be back and to hang out with you today. It feels like it's been way too long since I It feels way too long since I last went live, and I sure hope this problem saying that isn't indicative. There it is, another word, that I'm going to struggle talking all day today. Do you have moments like that where you start to try to say something and everything comes out gobbledygook? Well, today we're going to talk about arguing with narcissists. Why arguments with narcissists seem to never end well, and what we can do about it, what we can do instead, how to handle it in a different way. And please forgive my flushed look. I had a HIIT workout prior to this. I was aerobic HIIT workout, and whenever I get overheated, it takes a while for my face to kind of lose the flush. So I apologize for the overly red face today. But I got into thinking about arguments with narcissists. I'm going to pause for a second and I'll start that again. I want to first set up how we're going to handle today, because those of you who are new to my platform may not know how I do things, but I will take your questions for the last half hour. I'm here for an hour, but the first half an hour, I'm going to talk about a topic. I'm going to educate and kind of discuss this, break it down for you. I'm a psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience. I want to make sense of why arguments with narcissists or other toxic people never go well. And then we're going to jump to the back half where we can talk about your problems with arguments, or maybe any other issue that you have related to dealing with relationships, unhealthy relationships, healthy relationships, or whatever. So I can't wait to take your questions, but it will be in the last 30 minutes of this live. So let's leap into talking about arguments with narcissists. I want to first start with a preface of how I got to thinking about this. A colleague of mine was sent a video. This person videotaped his wife arguing with him. And he said, and by the way, I don't mean this gender specific. It could be the opposite. It's not necessarily about him being a man or her being a woman. It could have been a woman did this and it would be about her husband. So that really isn't the point. The genders aren't the point. I'm just setting up the situation. But he taped an argument that he was having with his wife, and he sent this video saying, doesn't it figure that narcissists always have to create problems on the holiday? So in other words, he was prefacing it as he was the good guy. He was the one trying to enjoy the holiday, and then sure enough, she had to make an issue of it. So it was a 2-part videotape, and I watched the whole thing. What I noticed was that the toxicity wasn't coming from her, it was coming from him. That he actually probably was the one who had more of a personality struggle. Maybe, I'm not saying he's a narcissist. I don't know. I don't know the guy, so I can't diagnose. But it was clear that his way of arguing was actually fueling the argument instead of resolving it. I'm trying to remember what the setup about the argument actually was. I think it was something like some issue about some plan. They were trying to finalize something, and he wouldn't finalize it with her. Instead, he blocked her, and everything that she brought up, he countered and made it her. So there was a lot of gaslighting going on. But he also then just attacked her style of talking and just sort of demolished it. Accused her of being black and white, accused her of not knowing her own mind, accused her of always having to get upset. Just did all this circular stuff. He essentially, and this what got me intrigued, I started to realize that I always thought of stonewalling is when you just sort of stand up and storm out. But I realized listening to this that you can stonewall verbally. You can actually just create sort of a psychological wall and say, I'm not going to talk about XYZ, which is what he did. He wouldn't address the issue. He made her the issue. And so there was no resolution, except for she actually was quite calm throughout the whole thing. She just sort of at the end stood up and walked out. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what happens with arguments. I think the first problem that happens, and I know this is not the first time I've said this, is that most of us go into a conflict, and I don't even want to use an argument. Let's just kind of say that there's a differing of opinion. Most of us go into a difference of opinion, or even trying to work out details with something with the goal of finding a solution. And I know I've talked about this before with Darvo, where two people might be trying to figure out how to do carpooling or go to work. And but what happens is instead of the issue being the issue, it becomes not the issue. The relationship or the other person becomes the issue. So, what are some common techniques that we've experienced when we do this? One obviously is DARVA, which is where you bring up the issue and then the person who is attacking you actually denies it, attacks you for bringing the issue up, and then victimizes themselves by saying you're hurting them by talking about the issue. I'm thinking of how my ex one time when I brought up something about related to his serial cheating, he's like, why do you always have to make me feel bad, make me feel so guilty? And I'm thinking, dude, because we have no closure on this. So they flip the script and they become the one who's being hurt by you having the issue. So that's one thing that they do. But have you ever heard of narcissistic word salad? When I first heard this, what threw me as a psychologist is that this is a common symptom of schizophrenia. It's called word salad. And when you hear it with schizophrenia, they're actually two different things. But when you hear it with schizophrenia, it's just a bunch of gobbledygook words thrown together that have no meaning. They just are. Sometimes they like it because the words all start the same letter, like a consonant. It's called clanging. Well, they'll do like change chunked against the concrete wall that, they'll find like C's or CH's or whatever, or K's or J's. They'll find a certain sound and then they'll string the sound together because they like the way the sound sounds. And that's kind of what's called word salad with a schizophrenic. But this is different. A narcissistic word salad is a circular argument. It's when they bring up an issue and then there really is no, if you try to follow the string of thinking, there's no logicalness to it. They start at point A and then they go to T and then they come back to B and they go to D. It just ends up being in this very circular fashion that has no beginning and has no end, and it just leaves you scratching your head. You walk out feeling dazed and confused. And that is the point of it. That's exactly the point of it. The point of it is to sort of obscure the issue by creating psychological confusion, and they're very good at doing that. So if they don't want to say, where were you last night? They will, instead of talking about where they were, they'll start in, our car's having problems, and why didn't you take it into the mechanic? And then I went and saw Paul, and he tried to help, and then we got lost over it. And you're like, that's not, but the question was, where were you last night? Instead, you hear this sort of this lengthy story. And the goal of that, there's a goal to it. The goal of it is not only to confuse you, but also to exhaust you so that you stop asking questions because you don't want another 5-minute expose that leads, or exposition that leads to nowhere because it's meaninglessness. So one thing that they'll do is they'll do word salad, narcissistic word salad. They'll also, here's another thing, and I want to tell you to watch out for something because they're going to use it against you. And this is a thing that a lot of women do more than men. Women use black and white language, like all or nothing language, not because we're necessarily literal thinkers or concrete thinkers. We do it really as a way, it's like emojis. So we just did a poll. Have you ever wondered if you're the narcissist? And 60% of you said, I've actually considered it. And 40% of you said, no, I've never thought of that. Very interesting. So you will, so women, one of the ways women talk as a way to emphasize something for intensity is we use words like all the time, or it never happens, or we use those. We use kind of abstract words that are really, but men tend to think more concretely. They don't tend to think abstractly. So when they hear you say all the time or never or always, they hear literally you're saying as if every single time this issue's come up, this has been a problem. You're not actually saying that. You're just saying, I want to take this sentence and I want to bold it and highlight it and spotlight it so you know that I feel really upset about this. That's what we're saying. We're just saying if we could put emojis around it, we would. Because or put it like all in caps. We want it all in caps. But because we can't, we use these intensity words as a way to increase the feeling of it. But what happens, especially with toxic people, they'll pick that up, that we're using an intensity word, and they'll then define it concretely, saying, and they'll make that the argument point. I don't do it all the time. You're wrong. I only did it 10 times out of the last 11 times or whatever. So watch out for that, because one of the things we fall into is trying to get our point across, and it doesn't work. So they'll use narcissistic word salad. They'll use literalness as a way to shut down the conversation. And then they'll gaslight. And I kind of already mentioned Darvo as one of the gaslighting techniques, but it doesn't have to be Darvo. Darvo is a specific form. It's when if you said, you said that I'm not here for the kids, and then the person will respond, I never said that. They'll deny and then say, you always make this shit up. They'll attack you. And then you say that I'm not a good parent, and that's really offensive to me. So they'll flip the script, make themselves to be the victim, and you're the bad guy for bringing the issue up. But that's not the only form of gaslighting. It could be that they simply say you remembered it wrong, or that's not how it sounds to me, or they'll do something that suggests that the way you perceive it is incorrect, that you're being oversensitive, or that you're not remembering it right. And then what that does is it often throws us up, and it erodes our sense of self-esteem and makes us feel very confused, which is the point. Again, it's a way of substituting your reality for their reality, which their reality is to get out of the conversation. I would love to know what other kinds of attacks you've experienced in these types of the arguments. I often have seen stonewalling, where they just get up and walk out. Or in this example that I was sharing, this guy was using verbal stonewalling, where he just refused to discuss the issue. But the big thing that really throws us is that we never get to a solution. In fact, what's happening is it's making you the problem, and then it is also as a way to avoid any solution by just creating upsetness and drama. And that's the point. The point isn't to find a solution. The point is just to be difficult. So one of the other things that often happens is that they then accuse you and I of being the problem, that there was no problem until we brought the issue up, and that maybe we're the problem to begin with. And I would love to see how common that is. And that's why we ask the question, how often have you ever wondered that you're the narcissist? Because many of us walk away, end up thinking that we have the problem because we bring up a comment, and then it ends up being problematic. So maybe we're making it up. Maybe we're the ones being difficult. And I'd love to know if that's something you've ever actually struggled with, is wondering if you're the narcissist. What's interesting is this person who sent the video believes that they're the one who's being offended by their partner, when really actually the techniques this person was using was actually quite offensive and probably suggests that they're the one having the problem. So does the toxic people in your life know that they're toxic? Or do they think you're the toxic one? And how do you know who's the more toxic individual? Because one thing that happens is we start to become more toxic when we're around toxic people. We pick up sort of their bad habits. I remember doing some of that because I thought, I'll give him a taste of his own medicine. Maybe if he realized how awful this was, he'd stop doing it. And so then I started using some of his lines of arguments, not apologizing, or kind of avoiding the issue, or, I tried to, I don't really want to lie, but I tried to skirt around the edges and throw some of it back in his face to see if maybe things got better. Now, it doesn't work. I suspect in your case, it didn't work for you either. But it does really erode our sense of confidence in ourselves and make us wonder whether or not we're problematic because we're the ones who are having the problem. So here's a good test to ask yourself if you're struggling, wondering who's the more toxic in the relationship and wondering if maybe you're the toxic one. Ask yourself this question. The person which of the two of you has a history of problems? Which of the two of you has a history of difficult relationships, loses relationships, creates all sorts of, everything seems to go wrong, and has a history of a lot of a lot of lost jobs, or a lot of failed projects or failed goals? Like they say, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and then it doesn't pan out. And I'm not talking about an ADHD tendency, because I know that can happen for ADHD just gets distracted and moves to something else. I'm talking about a person who creates, and this is what the best analogy I can think of, a person who creates sort of a cyclone of drama around them. There always seems to be something going wrong, constantly. And it preceded the other person entering their life. See, that's the other key piece. It's historically been an issue. It isn't a new issue. It's a historical issue. You'll see this pattern of chaos and a pattern of drama and conflict and things just falling apart. I did a background check on my ex, and my big question really was something else. I was looking for a different answer. But one of the things that came back was his financial and legal history was challenging. There were lots of financial failures that showed up on the report, credit problems. There was lots of jobs that showed up for somebody his age shouldn't have had that many jobs. There were tons of apartment moves, like 14 to 15 different apartment moves. There was this pattern of like inconsistency and failing to kind of stay with something. You'll see that kind of a pattern with someone who's struggling with consistency and responsibility in their life. You're going to see this sort of just this chaos, too much change, too much chaos. That's a good sign that you've met somebody who's been having problems for a while, and it circles around them. What the issue with personality disorders is that their condition, their disorder, their personality disorder doesn't cause them problems because it's who they are. It'd be like saying me having brown eyes is problematic. I'd say, well, they've always been brown. I don't even know what you're talking about. What would life be like with blue eyes? I've never had blue eyes. So they don't see it as they see it as inherently part of who they are. So therefore it's not an issue. But those around them just experience this swirling, constant uproar. I kept thinking when I was in that relationship with him that if we would get over this next difficulty, whatever it was, he was between jobs, or he didn't know what to do with himself, or he was bored, or he was struggling with an addiction, or whatever. I kept thinking if we solved that problem, that we'd get on kind of good footing and a good foundation, and life would quiet back down again. But it never did. It was just another thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. And that's what you're going to find. If you experience that sort of like chronic upsetness, chronic disruption, that's a sign that you've met somebody who's doing something that's not leveling their life out. Because healthy people, because of their determination, their consistency, their good judgment, their good impulse control, their good observation of themselves and knowing themselves, they make decisions that lead to success and consistency. They lead to decisions that mean they keep jobs and they keep relationships, and they don't leave things to the last moment. So their cars don't fall apart, and they don't run out of gas on the highway, and they don't run out of money and then have no money to be able to buy lunch for the last week of whatever. You'll find this consistency because they're making good decisions, and it's the small decisions that lead to even better, bigger decisions. And toxic people who just don't do that because they're living spur of the moment. They're not insightful. They don't remember that in the past this didn't lead to a good spot, so they don't learn from past problems, and you'll just see this cycle of spinning and chaos and drama. So if you are in a relationship with someone who's problematic, who accuses you of being the problem simply for bringing up the problem, that doesn't make you the problem. It makes them the problem for having issues, for the inability to look at themselves. That's what the problem is. So I'm going to put my glasses on so that I can see what you guys are saying, and then let's talk more about this issue. I would love to know how many of you have experienced this in your life, and how are you doing with it, and what makes it difficult for you to do more with it. Because like I said, I kind of got caught up in the idea that if we could just solve the problem, life would get better, because that's what it did for me. I assumed that I worked things out. When I got into an issue, I got out of the issue and things got better. You know, I was thinking about when I started grad school and I moved to San Francisco Bay Area, and we didn't have a bank account, so we couldn't get an apartment, and then we had all these things kind of dependent on each other. We just figured it out, got past it, and then life got better. But my ex, who was a narcissist, No, it just was like one issue after another issue. It just like, I just felt like we couldn't get out of the storm. Just was always, always, always problematic. Yeah, so somebody says, sounds like privilege, and the privilege doesn't make better decisions, they just make better decision options. Nah, I disagree with you, Chippy. So on Instagram, somebody said, maybe chronic bad decisions is just really a reflection of not having more privilege. I agree that privilege can be a problem. And it is hard as a white woman to say that I would know what not having privilege is like, since I've always had a level of privilege. So I know that I can't be entirely non-biased about this, but I also have seen people with privilege do the same thing, who have access to money, access to good education, access to, whatever resources those who don't have it wish they had, and they don't do any better with it. So when you control for the variable of privilege, it doesn't seem to make any difference. What we're talking about is a hardwiring personality tendencies that struggle with impulse control, self-reflection, good judgment, ability to delay impulses. That's something that is not related to privilege. It is something that's actually hardwired into your personality. And that's been shown by research. Research is bearing that out. So this is not, yes, those who don't have privilege certainly have an uphill battle. That is absolutely true. But we're talking about something a little different. Bonita wants to know, can we take up a subject? Can you say again about when we take up a subject and they don't want to talk, what to do about it? Well, that's a great point. So let me jump to that part, because I don't think I really covered that part very well, Bonita. So let me talk more. I love it. Bonita Anita. You're a beautiful Anita. Yeah, I bet you are a very beautiful Anita. So what do we do when we're in an argument? We've started a discussion, and we can already tell that it's going wrong, and they're putting up all the barriers, deflecting on purpose, making this an argument that's not winnable. What do? You stop trying to win it. That's what you do. You stop trying to win it. Be careful about your rage, because it's very upsetting to have someone who does this. I know for me, I feel hot and intensely upset. I feel misunderstood, and I get mad, and I want to drive the point in harder. Be careful. Don't do that. It won't work, because that's what they want. It'll move you into what's called reactive abuse. When you react in an abusive way. That's the risk here, is that you're just going to keep increasing the intensity. It's really, in a way, you guys ever play with a top? You know what tops are? They have like a plunger at the top, and you plunge it and it spins up, and then you get it spinning so fast you can stop, and it will kind of, go off and do its own thing, wander around the room. Yes, I was born in the 60s, before a lot of technology, and we could spin tops. That was one of the things I did for fun at my grandma's house. She had a nice flat linoleum floor, and we'd spin tops on it. That's what they're doing to you. The style of argument that's happening is they're spinning you up. They're actually fueling fire. They're upsetting you on purpose, spinning you up, so they can then release it and then watch you, which is why they tape. They tape it because they've set you up. Now they want to watch you just sort of lose it. This is done purposefully. So when you do that, you've actually fallen prey to their goal. Their goal isn't a solution. Their goal is to get you upset. Their goal is to look like you're the crazy one, and they have to put up with you, that poor person, for having to put up with you. So do not in any way fall into that. I know it's hard. It was very, very hard for me. So somebody said, just walk away. Yeah, that's the best line of defense. It's just to sort of quietly keep your voice low, calm, very neutral, and then just sort of make your point, keep it back on whatever it was you brought up, whether it was the garbage or carpooling or what we're going to do for Christmas or whatever the original issue is. Keep it back on the point of what you want to have happen. State your goal. State the goal that you have. I'm planning to do this, and then end the discussion. So if you can't be spun up like a top, then they can't control you, and that's the point. The point is several folds. One is they just like to be antagonistic. So part of it is there's just really not more to why they do what they do. They just like to be antagonistic. But they also like to transfer their upsetness, their misery with themselves and with life. They want to make you miserable with them. So there's another goal. They also want to make you the problem and so they can walk away with a story of what a difficult person you are, so that you're falling into that trap when you start to argue with them. And they also like to maintain power and control. And the best way to have power in a conflictual moment is to shift the focus from the issue to you. That keeps them in control of the situation and makes you the problem. They maintain power. So all of these things are reasons why people do this. So we just asked the question over on TikTok, how many of you have been accused of being the problem? And 91% of you said, yes, you've been accused of being a problem. Yes, that's a very common dynamic. They love to make you the issue because that then does two things. It makes them the victim, which is a really great story for them to then to go complain about you, which is like this person did, sending this video to somebody else saying, oh, my partner had to ruin holidays on me. When we watch the video, like, no, you're ruining the holiday for her. And the second is it keeps them in control. It really does. Do they think they're the problem? So Carrie over on Instagram wants to know, do they really think that no, they don't think they're the problem, because they say that they did nothing. This argument just started. Now, in real life, things need to be solved. We need to make plans. So it isn't like you're being problematic by saying, hey, let's address an issue. But they like to take that on as, you're creating problems because you brought it up. Well, if you don't bring it up, then how do you guys know what you're going to have for dinner? How are you guys going to know what you're going to do for this weekend? How do you plan anything? You can't plan anything, that's another thing, is they essentially then shut down your power. They disempower you by taking all of it back and holding the frame by saying they're only allowed to bring issues up. You can't even bring anything up. They literally, essentially make you a non-issue, a non-person, and you have no voice in this relationship at all. It's, very, very, very toxic. Yeah, as someone, Alan Becker, Jennifer said, they shift the shame to you. They shift the shame, but they shift everything to you. So if you have any more questions on this today, or if something I feel like I didn't cover really well, why don't you make sure you put a thumbs up so I know you're talking to me. But also I'd be happy to take any other questions that you have. And I want to thank those of you who are here. I see many of you that I know that I so appreciate. My mods are here that are really helping out, Sarah, as well as Brittany. And I also see that Bree with Abuse is Abuse. And if you don't follow Bree over on Abuse, she's awesome with helping you set boundaries, help you create a kind of like how to reclaim your voice, reclaim your life. She also has really great content on family abuse and that kind of issue, as well as how to deal with anxiety and claim your life back. So it's Bree is amazing. Abuse is Abuse. She's both on Instagram as well on TikTok, and I'm so thrilled she's here. She's a colleague of mine. Her and I are both in a big, large collaborative group, and we do a lot of really cool things together. So I so appreciate that. So if you have a question for me, please make sure you put a thumbs up so I know that you're talking to me. So HRM says, how do you deal with them shaming and smearing your name? Yeah, that often happens. It happens to us when we're in the devaluation and the discard, but it also happens post-relationship. And the reason it happens is because they're trying to maintain a good image. They want them to know that the issue isn't them, the issue is you or other people. But what's interesting is when anyone who knows them, who's been around them, knows that they always have the problem with their latest. That it's the story of their life. It's the theme of their life. So if someone believes that tells me a lot about that person. That tells me that's somebody who needs that toxic person's acceptance and acceptance and accommodation, kind of goodwill. And I would avoid that person. That is not a healthy person. Anyone who feels they need to have a narcissist like them or include them or be in some kind of relationship with them, that is somebody I would find is a dangerous person. Because here's the bottom line. I'm going to go back to your question. You're not going to be able to stop the smearing and the shaming. You're not. They will do that. They just will do that. But what it does is it gives you a good litmus test of who to trust and who not to trust. So as awful as that is, that it is a situation. There's another really great question that came in over on Instagram. How can you, if you're learning about a narcissistic life, how can you tell if you are one or if you're not one? And then Shannon, I see your question on co-parenting. I will get back to that. That's a provocative question. Are you one man? I would say it's back to you asking yourself, how successful is your life? Do you have a pattern of creating drama and chaos? Does a lot seem to go wrong in your life? Are you struggling to really keep people in relationships? Do you find that you burn through a lot of relationships and that you meet somebody and you think this is the one, and then they end up being not the one, and then you meet another person and you think this is the one, or your plans just never seem to work out, or you move from project to project to project because of chronic boredom and chronic restlessness. If you find that you're just really having a hard time keeping these types of consistency in your life, that would make me pause and seek insight from a therapist. You'd need to see a psychologist, a social worker, or a psychiatrist to be diagnosed with narcissistic tendencies. Now, here's the other thing. I want to say this for everybody because I see a lot of people are like, ooh, this sounds a little close to me. Narcissism occurs on a spectrum. Everyone is on the spectrum. I'm on the spectrum. It goes from kind of low, normal, kind of healthy self-esteem and confidence all the way over to excessive inflation of self, or excessive preoccupation with one's victim or victimhood, or this inability to sort of deal with your envy and your restlessness and your need to manipulate and be in control of every situation. So we're all on this continuum from, no one's zero, guys. Everybody has a little bit, but no one's 100%. God forbid, that would be awful. But we're somewhere on the spectrum. Now, how do you get a diagnosis? Well, you need to see a licensed clinician for a diagnosis. Now, one of the arguments that comes in here a lot, and by the way, I am a licensed psychologist. I can give diagnoses, which is always interesting when people come in and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. I diagnose people. By law, I'm allowed to do that. But we can call out narcissistic behavior, and that's not the same as diagnosing someone with narcissism. That's not the same. A lot of us have narcissistic behavior. Even not narcissists have narcissistic behavior. So what is that? Let's talk about what is narcissistic abuse, because that's so critical. Narcissistic behavior is to get into a relationship with someone by creating a false reality in order to get an asset from that individual, but claiming that you're wanting the relationship for that person's good. So you go into it saying, I really want their love and attention. I'm going to act like I'm well-meaning, but I really just am using them. I'm treating them like a consumable, but I'm putting on such a good front that nobody knows that I'm actually have manipulative or exploitive reasons I'm in this relationship. And then I use this person, and it's abusive, but it's hidden because I have this good guy or wonderful woman facade, so nobody knows that I'm actually not who I say that I am. That's narcissistic abuse. A lot of people can do narcissistic abuse without being narcissists. But I'm going to follow one more line of argument that often comes in, I see a lot here, is that can a narcissist be a narcissist and not be abusive? That goes back to having to go to the DSM-5 and looking at the 9 criteria. I know I won't list all 9 off the top of my head, but they're envious, they're deceptive, they are exploitive and have an exaggerated sense of self-importance. They're entitled. They think they're special. Okay, if that's how you see yourself, how then will you treat others if you think you're privileged, entitled, special, you're envious, and you're manipulative and exploitive? Sounds abusive to me. So I don't think you can be labeled diagnosed by a clinician with a narcissistic personality disorder and not be abusive, because you wouldn't get the diagnosis otherwise, right? You wouldn't be envious, you wouldn't be exploitive, you wouldn't be manipulative, you aren't deceptive, you aren't thinking you're special and entitled. Then you're not a narcissist, because that's the criteria of being a narcissist. You see what I'm saying? So this idea that we're demonizing narcissists because we're saying that they're abusive, well, they lock in together. They are part and parcel. You can't separate the two out. I've lately I've been hearing it a lot this week. This is one of the common comments on I've been called a pop psychologist, that I'm hurting people, but I keep thinking, well, you haven't read the DSM-5. They literally don't, it doesn't work. You can't have an MPD diagnosis unless you're abusive. They just click. So I want to go back to that comment I promised to go to, because you guys have a really great questions. And I see the one about covert or overt narcissism. Yes, we can talk about that. That's great you're using that word. I wonder if you know what you're saying. But I'll talk about both meanings. What is a covert overt narcissist, as well as what is a covert overt narcissism, because they're actually two different things. So let me jump back to the comment that came in about co-parenting that I don't want to miss that one. It was a ways back. I'm sorry. And I said her name even. I'm trying to find her name. Wow. I'm not seeing, oh, here, co-parenting, even after divorce, it continues and uses the kids to hurt me. Yes, that's very common, Shannon. Very common. Because narcissists never stop being narcissists, ever. Not ever. So they're going to be hurtful and harmful all the time until they start to really work on their stuff and get accountability by a therapist or by somebody who really understands how to help them learn how to compensate for their personality deficits. That's the big thing. Yeah. So the question, let me jump to the question that we are talking about with overt and covert narcissism and covert and overt narcissists. They're two different things. So covert and overt narcissism, which is what Dr. Ramani talks about. So if you listen to her stuff, you'll actually hear her break this down. I got to sit in some seminars, some clinical seminars with her through continuing education, and heard her expound on this for several hours. Covert and overt narcissism is the manifestation of narcissistic traits. Covert narcissism, I'm saying narcissism, not narcissist, covert is what's hidden. It's what they experience on the inside. It's like the rage they feel, or the fantasies they play out in their heads, or the stories they tell themselves. These are the things it's the stuff that we can't see, but they experience. That's covert, means it's hidden. It's the hidden experience of narcissism. Overt narcissism is what we witness around them, what we experience. We hear them brag, and we see them lie, and we experience them argue unfairly, or whatever they do that's very, very kind of like toxic and harmful. It's what we witness. Overt means it's observable. It's what we witness. Okay, let's put that aside and talk about overt versus covert narcissists. Overt narcissist is synonymous with a grandiose narcissist. This is the braggart who's always the life of the party. They're in the center of the room. They're the ones with the lampshade on their heads, or the best car. They're bragging about how much money they made or the deal they closed. They're the ones who are kind of out front. They're really like pushy, and they're out front. A covert narcissist is synonymous with a vulnerable narcissist. That's the person, they're harder to spot. That's the person who is more passive aggressive. They will they're more likely to play the victim card. There are always things going wrong for them. Life is never fair, and they're envious of everybody else's success, and they seem sympathetic. We miss them because we think their sad stories and their plea for sympathy, we think that hints that they have empathy, but you find that they have no sympathy for you. And it's never your turn. They're always the one in the spotlight. The problems are always cycling and circling around them, and there's never any room for you. You don't exist for them any more than you exist for the over or grandiose narcissist. They're the inverse of it. They're the chronic victim. Things always go wrong. That's a way to spot them, is they always go wrong. They're very hard to spot because, like I said, we see the need, the plea for sympathy. So, see, a grandiose is pleading for admiration. They want you to admire and adore and worship them, where a covert narcissist is kind of seeking your sympathy. They want you to be chronically rescuing them. It's just, again, it's still the preoccupation. They're always the center of the world. They just seek different forms of supply. And then they also act out their aggression and their envy differently. An overt narcissist is more likely to lose it in rage and be very, bold, big, whereas a covert or vulnerable narcissist are more likely to be passive aggressive, to sabotage you, to do this really subtle kind of setting you up. They're going to be more sneaky. They're going to be more sneaky in how they get even with you. But both are prone to narcissistic rages, very, very much so. Great questions. So how else they're very challenging. I'm thankful most of my life I've not run across them, but boy, when I have, they're a nasty group, really nasty group. So someone wants to know, how does dissociative disorders play into NPD? So let me kind of stand way back and talk about the DSM-5 for a second. The DSM-5's broke down. It used to be more than it is now. Now it's sort of they don't compartmentalize or categorize away the same that they used to when I was trained. I was trained on the DSM-3, so this is the second version from the DSM-3. And by the way, they put these out every 10 to 15 years. So there's a lot of time in between each rendition of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and Conditions. That's what the DSM stands for. It's literally the psychiatrist, psychologist, social workers, the whole mental health field uses as our go-to for diagnoses in the United States. So when you go to see a doctor, like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they give you a diagnosis, they go to the DSM-5 and they make sure that your symptoms match, and that's how they determine what you have. And it even breaks down, if you have depression, this is how you know it's not anxiety, this is how you know it's not an addiction, this is how you know it's not an organic brain problem. It helps you kind of think through differentially to diagnose this person accurately. So there are conditions and there are disorders in the DSM-5. Conditions are things like Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety. Those are the things that would be a condition. When you struggle with one of those conditions, you feel miserable. You know something's wrong because you're not yourself. You would say, I'm not myself, something's wrong. And then you seek help because you want it to go away. You don't want to feel like this anymore. But personality disorders, it used to be categorized as a pervasive condition. Things like autism, things or learning disabilities. It's in the category of learning disabilities, things that are a part of a person that's pervasive and persistent. It doesn't change. It's part of their hard wiring. So personality disorders fit into that category. It's like your IQ. You're not going to change your IQ unless you have an accident and it gets hurt. But you're born with a set IQ, and then that's pretty fixed for the rest of your life. If you have autism, that's pretty fixed for the rest of your life. The same with personality disorders. It's fixed for the rest of your life. You don't have a condition. In fact, you don't even feel miserable. It's just who you are. I'm autistic. I don't even know what it's like not to be. So if you ask me, do I regret being autistic, or would I like to be, typical? I don't even know what that is. I can't tell you what typical is. So I can't tell you if I'd want to be that or not because I have no basis of comparison. That's the same for a personality disorder. A person who's a narcissist, they have no basis of comparison. They've always been that way. That's who they are. So the question about dissociative disorder, that's a condition, and then narcissism is a disorder. It's a permanent, persistent state. So you can have both going on at the same time. Now, here's the tricky part, back to when I said about differential diagnosis when you're trying to make a diagnosis. Some things look like other things. So let's take excessive energy just as an example, because this is a common problem. Patient comes in, they're fidgeting, they're bouncing, they're talking fast, they tell you they're not sleeping, they can't finish any project. I have to start in my head, run through what this could be. I want to know how long has it been going on, how bad, how long of the day do they experience it, what other symptoms have they been having, because it could be anxiety. It's something caused, maybe they're having anxiety attacks, maybe they're having generalized anxiety. It could be that I'm seeing bipolar disorder. Maybe this is more of a mood condition. It could be that I've seen somebody who actually has Maybe they have ADHD and they've always been this way. Maybe they're just, this is the hyperactivity. See how I have to sort through by asking certain kinds of questions that will tell me, is this a permanent, persistent condition like ADHD? Or is this something that just recently happened, like a bipolar disorder or an anxiety disorder? But I have to begin to, or it could be an addiction. Maybe they came in high and this is what they're like on whatever they're on. But I have to determine what it is by the question. So there are things that look a lot alike, and they fit multiple categories. And that's what that throws people off, is because I'll have people say, when I talk about a certain condition, I'll say, well, that's not just narcissists. ADHD does that too, or autism does that too. Yes, they do, but they also have other things that make that different. They're not the same thing. They're things that are different. But things can also, as this question asked, co-occur. It could be both going on. You could have someone who has MPD who also has a dissociative disorder. That's very possible. Dissociative disorders is a way we handle extreme moments of stress, anxiety by disconnecting our sense of self with our bodies, our sense of self. We disconnect. Yes, you can do those things together at the same time. That's what makes all of this so tricky, is that I wish it was simpler. I wish we could say it's this or it's that. No, it could be lots of things. And we have to sort of that's why you need a good clinician to sort of carefully tease these things apart so that you know whether or not it's a physiological problem, because also that causes problems. Did you know, for example, that there's a thyroid problem can look like mania, like bipolar disorder? That one of the big questions when someone comes in with bipolar-like symptoms, we ask ourselves what their thyroid level is. Same with thyroid also looks like depression. We have to ask ourselves, is their thyroid levels too low? And that's causing the depression. So there are things that kind of mimic each other or create the same symptoms, but could be for other reasons. And it really comes back. Do you ever guys watch the show House? That's what he did. That doctor, his main goal was to do very sophisticated differential diagnosis to identify things that look like other things. Like there's a form of heavy metal poisoning that can make you look schizophrenic. And you need to know that. You need to weed it out when you meet somebody. You need to know what those symptoms are so you don't mistakenly see a condition that actually could be poisoning them that actually is causing the psychosis. Yeah, so somebody just said, I've had derealization for the first time in my life. Yeah, derealization. So with dissociative disorder, there are several kind of conditions inside of it. One of them is derealization, depersonalization, and then there's also DID, dissociative identity disorder. So derealization is when you feel like reality isn't real. I've had that happen. I know what it feels like. It feels awful. Like you feel, if you've ever almost passed out, like you think you're losing consciousness, it feels like that. You feel sick, like something's really wrong. And meanwhile, you feel like you're floating and watching things happen like it's not really, it's terrifying. I agree. It's terrifying. I've also had depersonalization happen way back as a kid. I'm a survivor of catastrophic level trauma. So I was severely abused as a young kid, as a toddler and a preschooler. Yeah, I know. So I had some of the dissociative tendencies as a way to cope with extreme abuse. And yes, depersonalization feels like you're not yourself. You feel like you're in a body and you're watching yourself, but you're not really in yourself. It's, again, very strange, awful feeling. It's not comfortable. And then DID is when you dissociate with yourself. It's usually like a fragmentation of self. I'm not very good at all of this, so I'm just telling you because I'm not made it a study of mine, so I want to kind of tell you from a distance what I know, but please don't quote me. You'd want to do your own research. That's what I'm saying. But dissociative identity disorder used to be called multiple personality disorder. Did you know that you don't split into two people? It's never two. It's always more than two. That's one of the things that they've found, is that you just don't meet somebody with two sides. It's always more than two sides. It's a weird fact. Isn't that a weird fact? So if anybody comes in and says, yes, I split and I have 2%, no, then that's not probably DID. You're probably faking it. There's also dissociative amnesia. Yeah, it's true. Like a fugue. There's a fugue too, where you can sort of forget who you are or forget your past, Yeah. So again, I'm not an expert, so I don't know all of these super well. But what I do know about dissociative disorder is that I think it's a fragmentation of parts of ourselves. I don't think they're like fully constructed personalities usually. Yeah, usually. And I also find, here's another thing, is we end up assuming that people who do this are really chaotic and kind of disorganized people. Actually, that's the opposite. It tends to be the highly structured, over-organized personalities that are more prone to this. They usually struggle with more like OCD issues. They're very like very rigid, well-constructed personalities that are more prone to shattering like this. And again, it's a response to trauma. It's how they're coping with something that's highly upsetting, and they have no out. And so what they do is they find it out by leaving themselves or allowing another part of themselves to take over. That's usually what's happening. It's fascinating. It's just fascinating. Now, borderline personalities can look like dissociatives as well, but usually what they're doing is they're broken their affective states, like their rage or their grief or their shame, into different parts, and then experience those parts, then express themselves. So BPD can look really close to DID, but I don't think they're the same thing. And I have seen both of them in my office. I actually have worked with a DID briefly. That wasn't her main problem. Like I said, I'm not an expert in it. That wasn't the main problem. But I did see her shift in the room with me. And then I've had some borderline personality disorder clients who also then kind of shifted, but it was more affective, they led with their emotions. So suddenly they went from raging to crying, or kind of more of this, it wasn't a cohesive emotional experience. I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I love the story with Sybil. I thought that was really interesting. And one of my early experiences, and this was, I wish I remember her name. I think there was a psychiatrist who was brought in on the Kenneth Bianchi case, the Hillside Strangler. He was a Hillside Strangler, and I think it's in the LA area. And he claimed that he was a multiple personality disorder. That was his defense. He wanted an insanity defense. So they brought her in to analyze, to kind of do this analysis and to like prove, was he a split personality disorder or not? That was the question. So she got to present to our graduate program and shared how she disproved that he was a multiple personality disorder. So she gave him the Rorschach, which they don't do that these days. It's the ink blot test. I was trained on how to give it. It's a fascinating test. So she gave him the Rorschach test and then analyzed it and found that every personality he claimed he had saw the test in exactly the same way. So in other words, there was consistency across all the personalities. And she said, no, he's faking it, because multiple personality disorders don't show the same personality structure with different words. They have different manifestations for each personality. I thought it was fascinating. It was really, really interesting. I had the best graduate training. I love my program that I went to. I would highly recommend it to anyone looking for very, very good training. It's outstanding. Is there psychosis? So this is the last question I'm going to take today. Is there psychosis in BPD? It's not a DSM-5 criteria for PPD. I would say that it's possible, though, because BPD tend to have a lot of PTSD. So for those who don't know what I just said, let me re-say it in a more hearable way. So those with borderline personality disorder often end up abused. They're very vulnerable to trauma. They're very vulnerable to being abused, which will bring on a secondary condition of post-traumatic stress disorder. And yes, post-traumatic stress disorder can have reactive psychosis, brief reactive psychosis, where you, because of how destabilized you are from the traumatic event and processing a trigger, you could dip into being mildly psychotic for a period of time before you kind of gain balance again. Oh, there is one more other question that came in. Is every diagnosis just an imbalance? No, I wouldn't say that. Some are, certainly. That's true for bipolar disorder, is an imbalance of, we give lithium. So they found that lithium salts, which is naturally occurring in the body, tends to be low or off. So they give it as a way to Now, it's not the only form of treatment. There are other medications that do it too, that are stabilizing. But yeah, I would say that is a problem with ourselves. But That's not true with other conditions. I don't see that connection of imbalance, like being like we're off on our salts or off on our potassium level. I don't see it that way. But I do think this, that if we were better at self-care, like got more rest, we made sure we ate a balanced meal, we were getting exercise, we kept our stress low, a lot of us would be healthier than we are. That running ragged, running on empty, chronically over a long period of time does a lot of damage, not just physically, but does a lot of damage psychologically, and that we would be in better shape if we manage those things better. So I didn't talk about the fact that I have an online course and workbook called First Steps to Leaving a Narcissist. So if you're in a relationship and you don't even know what's going on or what's real, you don't know if you should stay or leave, please check that out. It is written for you, written for me when I was in that toxic relationship. I'm about ready to start to promote that I have an upcoming webinar, big news, with Lundy Bancroft. Why does he do that? Author of Amazon's best-selling author. Why does he do that? It's February 9th at 11:30 to 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, over lunch. It's going to be over lunch. I haven't put out the links to that yet, but that will be coming out this week. We'll be doing early bird sales, so if you want to save money on it, buy it before the first of the year to save $5 off the tickets. And the other thing I've got coming up is I've got group coaching with Trey De La Torre. I was like, yo, Trey, he and I are doing skill building for those who are post of narcissistic abuse relationship, but still finds yourself triggered and easily shaken and struggling with staying away, struggling to understand what's happening. If you want the skills to know how to kind of re-regulate yourself, kind of find that calm again, please check out this group coaching, 6-session group coaching. Is going to start on January 7th for 6 sessions. It's skill building. It's going to give you the techniques and skills that you need to be able to do that. And I do see the question about where I went to school. Please DM me privately about that, because I don't talk about it publicly. But yes, I know I brought it up, but I didn't mean to tease you with that. Thank you so much for following, for being here. I'll be back on Thursday at 1 p.m. I'm so excited to be here and get through this holiday with you. So I will see you on Thursday. Bye-bye, guys.